Today, got a short story for you before we get going. The story is a blemish on my life. It's not McDonald's exclusively. McDonald's, it's fine as a kid. I have very fond memories of Happy Meals. Anybody like Happy Meals growing up? Yeah? Are Happy Meals still a thing? Good. Do they still fill you with joy? Do any adults get Happy Meals? I've heard that too. Oh, good. There you go. So when I was a kid, I was a very curious kid. And I remember one of the earliest regrets that I had is, mind me, this might be a little gross. I took a small piece of hamburger and I wanted to see if I could eat it another way than just through my mouth. So I put it in my nose. And I got stuck. And I couldn't do anything. So I decided, well, I got to use a French fry instead. Lodging it further and further up my nose. No, it was not last week. I was probably like 5 or 6 at this time. So, high levels of intelligence at this point. But I tell you, it was not my smartest or brightest moment. And I remember regretting this and just thinking, I will never eat something through my nose again. I will only smell through my nose. And I think of these times, like if you posture the question, can you think of a time that you have thoroughly regretted something that has been so indelibly implanted in your mind that you just say, I will never do that again? Do you have something like that in your mind? For me, it was that. I'm never going to eat something through my nose. Plenty of other memories like that, but, let's start there. Can you think of those moments? Let's evolve that. How about something you know was wrong, but you refuse to change? I was always told, never listen to music as loud as it could possibly go. Guess what my problem is today? I can't hear that well. I get tingling in my ear. I didn't listen. But I know the problem now after lots of hardship coming to this point. And then the last one, how do you move from a place of shame or complacency to a desire for change? Those are those areas where you get truly stuck. Kind of like what we talk about in Celebrate Recovery, the idea of hurts and habits and hang-ups. When you are stuck, when you build up all those regrets, but you can't stop what you're doing. The habit just sticks. You're stuck. You're just living in regret then. We see this kind of idea panned out throughout 1 Samuel with the life of Saul. Saul becomes a man of regret but cannot move past where he was. And the problem that Saul had is not so much that he didn't know who God was, but he had a very low view of God and a very high view of himself. His regrets came from all of the misfortune that came his way, all of the threats that came his way, all of the issues that threatened his safety and security and power, his position in life. So the question for us becomes, what comes to your mind when you think about God? You might have all of your regrets in the past. And let me tell you, if you have those deep regrets, they do become blemishes because they keep coming back to your mind and you keep wondering, how do I live with this? How do I keep going past those memories that hurt? And then you think of all the anxieties in the future. I think of this morning. I had all kinds of problems this morning. And I was thinking, even going through all of this preparation for this sermon, all of the distractions that draw me away from my relationship with God are common. They're common for you as well. Because the number one thing that our enemy wants to do is distract you from a relationship with God. You might have a relationship with him, but it is very easy to remain distracted. A.W. Tozer writes this: what comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Low views of God destroy the gospel for all who hold them. Wherever you are positionally in your life, however you are currently thinking about God, whatever position you are placing God in your life, particularly what we've been talking about this entire year, who is king of your heart will determine your character. It will determine the trajectory of your entire life. It is the absolute most important thing about yourself. Who is your God, and who is God to you? That question you have to wrestle with every single day. So I titled this sermon, Don't Wait or Hesitate. Saul waited, Saul hesitated, Saul made a shipwreck of his life. And we see a tragic end for him in 1 Samuel 31. The big idea that I want to stress is your salvation and relationship with God matter when? Now. Do not wait. Here's a short history of Saul. Starting in chapter 9, we see Saul again as a very attractive and very popular guy from a very well-to-do family. He was known as being one of the most attractive men in the entire land. He was known by everyone, not specific for what he did, but that he was extremely good-looking, extremely tall, extremely powerful, and his family was very well-to-do. He was like the Kardashians of the time. Chapter 9 through 11, he was anointed to become the first king by Samuel, the last judge of the entire land. He was to be the absolute first king of Israel. Later on, he was appointed by the people as their choice king to be the one who fit the bill. He was the tallest. He was a head taller than all of the other Israelites. He looked impressive. And he was supposed to fulfill the role of being the king that would fight all the battles for the Israelites. He was the people's choice, not necessarily God's choice. He was equipped by God, but he was not God's choice. Later on, he was confirmed after a major victory in chapter 11. He rallies 400,000 some people together. They fight this great victory. They wipe out a terrible enemy who was plucking the eyes out of all of the people of the land. Horrible king. And he was threatening another town, and Saul saves these people. It is his highest moment in his kingship. And it is when people put the greatest amount of trust in him. But shortly after this, 2 years into his reign, Saul begins going his own way. He starts taking credit from his son, who would fight many other battles. And then shortly after, when things start going sour, he starts taking on the role of a priest. He starts taking on the role of trying to rush God, trying to activate God. And he's rebuked because he was afraid and he let his pride affect him. He loses his chance for a lasting dynasty as a king. Later on, he's rejected after his pride rules his heart. In 1 Samuel 15, he's given a very specific mission as a king to wipe out an entire people group who was radically evil. And it sounds awful in our day, but this was a unique moment when Saul was supposed to rise up and enact the will of God and his justice. And he said, no, I'm doing it my way. His pride ruled his heart instead of God. And in that moment, God rejected Saul. And the blessing left Saul. He still remained king. And in the coming years, when we see in chapter 16 through 20, Saul is consumed by madness. He's consumed by fear. He's consumed by everything. He's afraid of everything. He thinks anyone or everyone wants him dead. But his eyes become fixed on the future king, David. And he becomes a pursuer of David up to the point of his death. He chases after David for 15 years through the wilderness. This deadly game of hide and seek becomes an obsession for him. And his life is marked by becoming a madman. He's allowed the relationship that he once had with God to become devoid. He knew of God. He spoke in the name of God. He swore in the name of God. But he had great distance between his heart and God. This is the legacy that Saul builds for himself. He starts great. But man, if you let that distance grow, you do great destruction and invite death into your life. which is where we find Saul at the beginning of chapter 31. Only recently, the night before, Saul had made contact with a medium or a necromancer to find out if he could summon Samuel, who had recently died. And Samuel gave him the message, you're going to die tomorrow, and your sons are going to die tomorrow too. This is the judgment that was for you when you went your own way. So the morning comes, and the Philistines, who had gathered all of their armies, do great battle on a mountain, on Mount Gilboa, against the Israelites. It says, now the Philistines attack Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him severely or mortally. He knew he was going to die. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer. He said, take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to run me through and taunt and torture me. Now to pause just for a moment, I mean, this scene is gritty, to say the least. There is nothing pretty about war. I think we can become very desensitized to it with all the movies that we watch and think, how cool is this? Guy running in and explosions everywhere, and he's doing action roles and he's saving the day. None of that here. This is ugly. Political leaders, particularly during this time, if they were captured alive, they would be tortured in horrendous ways. Terribly gross things would happen to them. One of the most common things that would happen is they would be blinded. Many kings would either cut off the hands or the thumbs, particularly. One king back at the beginning of Judges was known to collect kings that he defeated. 70 kings, it was said. He would cut off the thumbs and the big toes and make them grovel on the ground, eating the food on the ground. And then he himself suffered that same fate. What happens to political leaders when they are captured alive is a very ugly thing. Even Saul, his thing, towards, I want to say it was 1 Samuel 19, he told David to go out, slay 100 Philistines, and collect their foreskins. It's an ugly thing. There's nothing pretty about this war. The thing that people tried to do during this time was create so much fear and so much intimidation that the other side would never want to attack again. And this defeat was so great, the Philistines slaughtered the Israelites so badly, this mountain became known as a landmark of defeat. It goes on. Saul's armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. He would not kill Saul. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died beside the king. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and his troops all died together the same day. When the Israelites on the other side of the Jezreel Valley and beyond the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. Stress what's happening. This is not justification for suicide. This is one of 7 instances that are recorded for either suicide or assisted suicide. The Bible is not explicit about what suicide means or denouncing it. But every instance where this comes up, 3 things are stressed. An incredibly troubled heart, someone running from God and in deep trouble, or somebody trying to take control of their life and say, I will do this on my terms. In all instances, this is again a sign of a distance from God. It's not diminishing the trouble. It's not diminishing the problems. It's not diminishing the pain. But it is seeing the effects of completely going your own way. And this is where Saul, his armor bearer, end up. We don't know what would happen if he didn't do this, but because he did this, because he tried to take control of his own life, he ended up in a sorry state. And the Israelites, when they witnessed this, when they witnessed the death of their king, the death of his sons, the death of a dynasty, the death of the army that they were trusting in, they flee their towns as well. I want to draw your attention again. Past couple weeks, we've been focusing on the idea of this, what calling means. John Stott writes, the expenditure of energy, manual, mental, or both, in the service of others, which brings fulfillment to the worker, benefit to the community, and the glory to God. Saul had a calling. Saul was supposed to be the king that revered God first, to have a deep relationship with both Samuel and God, constantly relying on God to lead him. But because he distanced himself from God, he no longer had fulfillment in his life. He was no longer a benefit to the community, and anyone who placed their faith in a king that was losing his mind, when he was gone, when his army was gone, so was the blessing. Glory was not given to God. Judgment was placed on Saul instead. And the Israelites might be wondering, how did we get here? We were doing so well. We were fighting all these battles. We fought the Philistines. We fought the Ammonites. We fought the Amalekites. We fought the Edomites. We fought all of our enemies. We had so much victory. Where did it go? Alexander Solzhenitsyn is very apropos to what happened during this time. He comes from the time when the Soviet Union was particularly strong. And one of the things that he faced is he lived a life of luxury at first. He started working for the side that would try to oust people who were against the government. Then he would move towards writing literature against what was going on. He was taken away to the gulags, where he was forced to work and remain in prison for a time because of his ideas. Later, when he was released, he would share the experiences and he would share all of the problems that have come from communism. Or when, as Stalin writes, when it has become complete humanism, the complete separation from God. What Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, one thing that he would hear from all of the older people around him half a century ago when he was still a child, the explanation for all the great disasters that had befallen Russia was that men had forgotten God. And that's why all this is happening. When men forget God, when women forget God, when we all forget who God is, we lose ourselves. We become more violent. We become more vicious. We become evil. And we see this. The Philistines, they take a very dark route. It becomes a gospel of evil of sorts. This picture is actually a dig site that was drawn after it was unearthed back in the 1920s. Under Beth Shean, where Saul's body was likely taken, and temples were built to honor the Philistine gods. This is likely what their temple looked like. It says, the next day when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off Saul's head, and they stripped off his armor. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death in their pagan temple and to the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths, or the goddesses of war that they worshipped, love and war specifically. They put his armor there, and it says in 1 Chronicles that they actually take his head and they put it in the temple that is devoted to Dagon. If you're very astute and you remember way back at the beginning of 1 Samuel, do you remember what was placed in the temple of Dagon? The Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence is. God's presence isn't here right now to save Saul, because Saul has been rejected. When it was just God, God completely thwarted the Philistines. This is a sign of complete separation between Saul and God here. This is the byproduct of completely going your own way. And what happens afterward is they fastened his body to the wall of the city of Beth-shan. It's not a pretty picture, friends. This is the gospel of evil. When the Philistines thought they had won, they thought they had completely beaten Saul, completely beaten Israel, and completely beaten their God. And they put Saul's body, his decapitated body, fastened it to a wall, saying, "We have conquered you." People of Jabesh Gilead, the ones that Saul first saved, they hear what the Philistines had done to Saul. All their mighty warriors traveled through the night to Beth-shan and took the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall. They brought them to Jabesh, where they burned their bodies. Then they took their bones and buried them beneath the tamarisk tree of Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. It's a strange sight. The people that Saul first saved are the only ones to come to Saul's rescue. All Israel otherwise flees. The highest moment when Saul was trusting in God most, the people that he saves there are the ones to save him. And they go through great trial to get there. They travel by night, which is difficult as it stands. They travel across a river. Usually, particularly if it's in a flooding season, this is an impossible river to cross. This is generally a picture of where they would have crossed, near Beth-shan. They would have to ford across the river, and then going straight into enemy territory, right up to the walls where Saul's body was, where his sons were as well. They would take the bodies down, travel back as well. Yet they do this still, because they hear there is a great evil that has happened. They seek to right a wrong. And they brought them back to Jabesh. They burned the bodies. They burned the mutilation. And they honor Saul. And it seems kind of strange. Saul, who has gone mad, Saul, who has lost his way, they still honor him for what he had done for them once upon a time. They remember his legacy not as the one who had lost his mind, but the one who sat under the tamarisk tree, who was righteous at certain moments. And then they fasted for 7 days to keep their eyes fixed on God. It's really a strange sight. There's a lot of irony in the end of Saul's life. So what was Saul ultimately known for? 1 Chronicles 10, 13 through 14 shares just about the same story, but they give an epilogue. They say Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He did not keep his word to the Lord, and even consulted a medium for guidance, and did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. Frankly, Saul might be considered a bad guy, a bad dude by all standards of how he lived his life. I mean, he was no longer faithful. He was pride-filled. He was easily distracted. He was fearful of anything that could cause danger or threat to his security, his power, or his safety. Friends, is that familiar? Do any of you identify with that? I do. I've gone my own way. I've done my own stuff. I veer off track. We can easily take the route that Saul takes. Saul went as far as he could possibly go away from God. Even when he was about to die, he does not give up his regrets. He does not give up his anxieties about the future. Instead, he retreats further into himself. The call is for us to return back to God, especially when we veer off and go our own way. The legacy that Saul leaves is that he was unfaithful and he never returned. He did not inquire of the Lord. We saw a couple weeks ago that David, he had gone his own way. He had done his own thing, yet he returned back to the Lord even in a dire moment when he was about to die from all sorts of different ways. His own people, the Philistines, and the nation of Israel were against him. He returned to the Lord, though, and found his strength there. Saul didn't find his strength. This is what we wrestle with, friends. It's important to know that if it's not the constant warfare that's going on in our minds, if it's not the war of our minds distracting us from God, we do have a constant enemy that seeks your destruction as well. Since the very beginning, as is recorded in Revelation 12, 1 through 16, it is important to know who your enemy is. There was a great sign that appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Now, there's a lot of imagery in this, but what is seen here is that at the very beginning, God chooses a particular people. He loves these people dearly. He gives a promise to these people, to the Israelites. And from the Israelite line comes Jesus. Further down the road, he is born. He pays the ultimate price. And now he reigns as king on his throne forevermore. And we see in verse 7 that a war breaks out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough. And they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah, for the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before God day and night, has been hurled down." This literally means we no longer have that accuser threatening us. We no longer have this great enemy standing between us and God. He is hurled down, and they triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. His desire is to drag all he can with him. I want to play a short video for you. Some of you may have heard this from Paul Harvey, but I think this is very apropos for our time, just to understand where and how we
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, "Do as you please." To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day.
What's fascinating about this video is it was made in 1965. We're 60 years removed from that. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's just continuing to do what he's already doing. It's not to put all blame on him because we are equally and wholly responsible for our actions and where we have distanced ourselves. Satan thoroughly distracted Saul. Satan thoroughly made a mess of the Israelite kingdom. And a gospel of evil was promoted for a time. The Israelites did not let that stand. And they made a right happen. But it is absolutely important that you know who your enemy is, and that the design is to distract you and lure you away from God. Even if you call yourself a Christian, even if you have a firm relationship, he will seek to make you an ineffective Christian. And an ineffective Christian, friends, is a gospel to the watching world. Because it doesn't show the hope that comes exclusively from Jesus Christ. The rest of Revelation says, when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman and sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to the testimony about Jesus. Friends, there's 2 threats. And we see it today. A threat against Israel, God's chosen people, and a threat against the church. These are Satan's targets. Because they stand as a testament to the watching world of the hope that comes exclusively from Jesus Christ. You have to know your enemy, because there's nothing more than Satan would want for the church to fail. But what you must remember is that the church shall never die, as is said in Matthew 16:18, and victory is already won. In 1 Corinthians 15:55, it says, "O death, where is your sting? It is gone." But still, friends, Satan will not stop, because he will try to drag each and every one he can with him. 1 Peter 5:8 through 11 says, "Be alert and of a sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." Anyone. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the glory, be the power forever and ever. Amen. This is where we must be vigilant. The big idea, friends, is this: your salvation and relationship with God matter now. Don't wait. Tomorrow might not come. If you have not made that faith step, it's one thing to just know God. Saul knew God, but I don't believe he ever made that faith step to give his heart to God, giving him the highest place. Have you given God your highest affection? Are you willing to surrender your life to God? Because I guarantee you, what the Bible purports is that the greatest way to live is within his will. Ignite can come up at this time too. The bottom line is, do not wait, do not hesitate when it comes to salvation from sin or walking with God. If you're not in a right place with God right now, pause. We talked about last week the idea of benching yourself. Do not do life alone. Do life with God. The mythical tomorrow may never come. God has called you uniquely his special creation. We must turn to him, to surrender our rebellions to him, and to follow him. What lies in wait for us otherwise is death and destruction. Let not the world celebrate that death, though. Let not the world rejoice in what it wants to rejoice in, because we have a greater hope that we hang on to in Jesus Christ, who has already wiped out the threat of sin and death, and has given us the promise of resurrection, a true and living hope that lasts forever, not just in some future date, but now and forevermore. That's what we celebrate. And that's what I encourage you to pause and remember each and every day. Because, friends, it's so easy to get distracted. It's so easy to get caught up in things in our life. And our enemy is very tricky and knows just the right buttons to press to lead you astray. As I said, this morning was tough for me, and I could have easily gone astray, seeing all the things that were going on. Car broke down. Kids sick. My pie was not working. Kept crumbling, but I still made it work. But it's like, you spend an hour trying to fix a pie, man. It's so easy to get mad. But it's like, stuff starts piling up, and it's like, my life is just like, oh. And, I can say, these are first world problems, but they are distancing things. And if I did not give that to God, that could easily consume me and lead me completely astray. My encouragement to you over the next week is to practice prayer. Maybe set an alarm at 3:20 to work through Ephesians 3:20 and keeping that in mind, which says, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us." Hanging on to that, knowing that God is greater than your problems, is immense. I would encourage you, if you are living through a very distracted moment in your life right now, I would encourage you to practice fasting. Fasting historically has come across as just removing food from your life for a short time. You can do the same thing with technology. Our phones consume us so easily. But during the time when you let go of it, even if it's just for half a day or a couple hours, devote that time to God. Start with your own heart. If you are not right with God, that's where you need to start and give it to Him. Think of the immediate things around you in your family, with amongst your friends, or in your workplaces. How is God speaking to you? Where have you grown complacent and dull? Give that to God. You might think of your community as well. I see all kinds of complaints on Facebook, and I don't know how many of you are part of the Hartford Complaints and Gripes group, but I see all kinds of things popping up. I've seen the things a couple weeks ago about the drag show that's coming up next week. I've seen things come up about dogs getting out and probably biting other people. I've seen things about how people don't obey speed limits, or, they go too slow. I've seen people complain about kids, how they're bullies to one another, and I've seen how the older generation doesn't understand the younger generation, and the younger generation doesn't understand the older generation. I see all kinds of things pop up within our community, but if you know what's going on, instead of complaining, give that to God first. Take dedicated time to fast in an undistracted fashion. In those moments where you would normally be on your phone or normally dedicate your time to eating a meal, focus on these three things. Where's your heart? Focus on your immediate group and focus on your community. Give these to God. Because, friends, the closer you are in your relationship with God, the better your life will be. Because the greatest thing about yourself is how you define your relationship with God. I'll be up here.